What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and the early rounds of your fantasy draft are the most important. In rounds 1 through 6, you are building out the pillars of your team, and if you screw these picks up, your team is going to crumble. So today, we're going to talk through the perfect early round draft strategy for 2025. We're going to cover how I see the player landscape in those first few rounds and talk about where I see the tier breaks and what players I'm targeting, along with what picks I like the most in terms of do I like the 101 or the 112 or the 107, and rank all of them in terms of how I see the draft board this season, talk through overall strategy, and then get into 3 different mock drafts from 3 different positions on the board to make sure you are covered. I know a lot of you guys have drafts this weekend and you're cramming, and this is the perfect spot for you. So as always, if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and let's talk about how I see the first 3 rounds and my favorite spots to pick from. Now, to get a consensus draft board here, we are going to be using the consensus rankings from ESPN, Yahoo, and Sleeper. I had a fan help me make a tool that compiles the default rankings from every single site, compares it against high-stakes ADP so you can leverage it and find the best values in all of your leagues. All I ask that if you use this resource, I will have it linked down below in the description and the comment section. Just subscribe. Only 50% of you guys are subscribed right now. Let's get it to 75-25. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new. And this, by consensus here, shows that based on Sleeper, ESPN, and Yahoo, that the top 3 right now are Jamar Chase, Bijan Robinson, and Saquon Barkley. And this is what we're going to use here to define the tier breaks in the overall landscape for your league. First off, we have the top 6. To me, Jamar Chase is in his own tier, not like mini tier, as the clear 101. If I have the 101, I'm taking Jamar Chase no matter what. And I will say, when we're going to show these little tiers, I have a green box over my favorite players in the tier. Then, my 2 favorites not named Jamar Chase, Jahmyr Gibbs and CeeDee Lamb. To me, Jahmyr Gibbs is an RB1 overall candidate, and you can get him at 105, which is nuts. And then CeeDee Lamb as well, 2023's wide receiver 1 overall. Wouldn't be shocking for him to do that again in 2025, but to me, you can't go wrong with any of these guys. These are the top 6 elite, surefire studs in fantasy football, and if any of them fall to you at the 107, 108, you jump on it quick. Now, after that, we have a flat tier from the 1-2 turn. When we get to the 107, you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, McCaffrey, Neighbors, Puka, so on and so forth. Now, for me, I actually have Christian McCaffrey in a mini tier ahead of all of these guys at the 107, kind of similar to Jamar Chase in the last tier, right? So this is the 1-2 turn area. I would have McCaffrey in a tier of his own at the 107, and then you just kind of have this flat tier of guys at this 1-2 turn, where I'm fine with Amon-Ra St. Brown, but taking him at the 107 when I know Brian Thomas is going at the 202 and I have them both in the same tier isn't very fun. I will say Genty, Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, all fine options here at the turn as well if you're looking for a running back. Achane a little bit less sexy now that he's hurt, but I do think at the 203, he's still a fine pick there. And then my favorite picks here, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas. If I can end up with 2 of the guys on this list at the turn, right? So at the 110, you're pretty much guaranteed to walk away with 2 of these guys, 111, 112. All of those picks, you can walk away with minimum 2 of these guys. It's not bad. And I will say, people get a little bit squeamish about, let's say, going Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr., but I think there's going to be so much running back firepower at the 3-4 turn where you can get Amarian Hampton, Kenneth Walker, James Cook, Trevion Henderson to come at that 3-4 turn that I don't mind actually going wide receiver, and then running back to kind of have a nice balanced approach. Now, I will say, in full PPR, I'd probably bump Henry to the next tier, but in half PPR, in standard leagues, you can absolutely take him right at the 1-2 turn and be absolutely fine with that pick. Again, I just want to be towards the back of this tier. Like pretty much if I'm at the 107, 108, 109, I'm hoping for McCaffrey or I'm hoping for one of those first 6 to get there. If not, it feels, I don't know, I don't have a better word for this. It just kind of feels yucky. But then we have the middle to late second tier where we have from the 204 all the way back to the 212 here, where to me it's just very flat. Like personally, I actually have Bucky Irving and Chase Brown over Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor. So for me, I have Bucky and Chase Brown as targets here where I would actually be pushing them up to the 206, the 207. I'm fine with Drake London where he goes, but it just doesn't feel great again because you're going to get the 204 is going to be 12, 11, 10, 109. So that means when you get to this 204 spot to take Drake London, you're getting the first player of a new tier, and then you took 109 neighbors or whoever here, right? So like Puka or whatever, you are drafting from the 109. And we're going to get into these picks in a little bit, so I'm sort of foreshadowing, but the 109 to me is pretty rough, where you are drafting at the front of the tier, right? Assuming that McCaffrey doesn't come to you, assuming that one of the top 6 don't fall to you, you are picking at the beginning of a tier both times, which is a little tough, right? When you come out of a draft, if I was to come out of a draft with like Neighbors in London as my first 2 picks or Genty in London as my first 2 picks, it just doesn't really feel all that cozy when we're talking about just like feel of a draft board. Now, here, I think London and A.J. Brown are rock solid if I start out with a running back up top. I will say I am kind of hoping that's with a McCaffrey or better, right? Because again, if it's like Genty or Achane or Derrick Henry with A.J. Brown or London, it just feels like a weak start compared to like Gibbs, A.J. Brown. To me, feels really strong. I will say people get a little bit squeamish. I like Brock Bowers. Tight end in round 2 is a little difficult. Like sometimes you're just not going to like your team. It's not going to be super pretty. But what I would say is that if you take Bowers in round 2, the biggest downside is that in round 3, quarterback and tight end, for me at least, is off the table. I don't want both elite quarterback and elite tight end, unless if it's a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, or like an 8-teamer or 10-teamer, where it's shallow enough where you can just go all in on your starting lineup. In like a 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, 12-team league, I want to be focusing on flex depth. So quarterback and tight end just is kind of a no-go at that point. And then Ladd McConkey, to me, he's in the same tier as A.J. Brown and Drake London, but he has the best chance of getting back to you, if you're at the 1 spot with Jamar Chase, or even if like Jahmyr Gibbs and Ladd McConkey feels really nice as well. Now, the last tier, and to me, the worst tier, is round 3. And it's just the entire list because it's absolutely brutal. I will make this even a little bit bigger so you guys can see it, but and we'll kind of go through the first half and the second half. But to me, round 3 is brutal. You want as many of these mid 2 guys to get to you in that early 3rd area, right? If you can get Ladd to come to you at the 301, 302, 303, same thing for McBride, Bowers, Bucky, any of those guys can come back to you. That's a massive win because to me, round 3 just gets really flat. I don't want any of these receivers. I think T. Higgins is fine, but you're going to get crazy values later, whether that's like Xavier Worthy in the 5th round or Tedero McMillan in the 5th round, or you can get even guys like Mike Evans in the 4th round. And to me, there's just not a huge difference there. Same thing with the running backs. A lot of really good running backs go in round 4. I'm also somebody who has Amarian Hampton ranked as like my 25th ranked player, 24th ranked player. He's still going by consensus as the 312 right now. If you find yourself where you need a running back in those first few picks, right, at like the 303, you can absolutely just take Hampton right there. And then the other guys I have green tier are the quarterbacks and tight ends. To me, round 3 is the perfect time, especially in a home league where quarterbacks and tight ends might go a little bit earlier than usual. Grab your Lamar, grab your Josh Allen, grab your Jaden Daniels, grab your Jalen Hurts, George Kittle, and sleep like a baby. And then boom, you have an elite quarterback or tight end. You come back around to the 4th round, you can just get values rest of the way. Again, though, if you do take Bowers in round 2, I would advise against that. I do want to add too that if I need a running back at the back half of the 3rd round, let's say Hampton's gone, let's say James Cook is gone, I'm absolutely fine pulling up to like the 308, 309, 310, 311, 312. Give me Kenneth Walker, Trevion Henderson, guys who are going in the 4th round of your home league. You can absolutely take those guys as early as like 308, 309, 310 if you need the running back help, especially the way I outlined earlier, where if you go like, let's say Nico Collins, Brian Thomas to start, you can then wrap back around and grab some kind of bundle of Cook, Hampton, Kenneth Walker, Trevion Henderson, all of those guys at the back half. But let's go to the draft slots real quick. All right, now this is the board we just covered, but visualized from picks 1 all the way through 36, so 101 through 312, and we have all of these draft slots to talk through. One of the most common questions I get is, Ron, where do you like to pick from this year? Do you like the 104, the 105, 106? Let's cover it here. This is how we're going to do it. It's a bit of a poor setup here, but we have an S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, F tier. This is just in terms of how we're going to rank things, because for me, there's some picks, right, like the 111 and 112. They're essentially the same pick. We're not going to rank all of them, but I have them allotted here, with S tier being the best, F tier being the worst. Let's start from F tier. For me, the 109 is the worst spot to draft from this year, and here's why. You get to the 109 spot, and we covered it early, but it is too late to get McCaffrey or one of the top 6 to fall to you, and then it's also too early to get one of, Neighbors or Puka, Nico, Brian Thomas, HN to come back to you. So then you're stuck with most likely Neighbors London or like Genty London or Genty AJ Brown, and it just feels really, really weak. So this is what we're going to write down for this. And I will say, like, if you want to screenshot this, you can. It's not early enough for CMC. It's not late enough to get some 1-2 turn value to come back. Now, C tier for me is 108, really for the same reason. Because, again, it is too late for CMC, but it is too early for any of those 1-2 turn guys to get back to you, right? So you have like Neighbors, Puka, Nico, Genty, Derrick Henry. Now, the reason it's in C tier is because maybe McCaffrey gets to 108, right? Maybe this guy at 107 has a guy he likes, whether it's Genty or Neighbors or Puka. You're essentially at 108 in my eyes, just how I see the board. I am hoping that McCaffrey gets to 108. If he does, then all of a sudden the 108 with a McCaffrey start, I think shoots up to like A tier. But I think in most competitive leagues, he's not going to get there. Then we have the 110. And this one's fine, but I don't love it for the reason that there's a couple of weak picks at the turn here, right? For me, I have Amon-Ra St. Brown, McCaffrey, Neighbors, Puka, Nico, Genty, Derrick Henry, Brian Thomas, Achane, all in the same tier. But I will say, now that Achane has an injury, along with maybe a Brian Robinson trade coming his way, I don't have Derrick Henry in this tier in full PPR. That for me, really 11 and 12 is the sweet spot, and 10 is where you have to kind of make a stand on this player here, take whoever you like the most, and then you might not love who comes back here. And then the 3-4 turn isn't great, but the 3-4 turn in home leagues I think is going to be better than expected. So we have 110 here in, I believe, B tier. Yeah, it's in B tier, so it's not like a terrible pick, right? Because you might get somebody to come back. I'm personally hoping for Brian Thomas Jr. to come back at the turn, and then all of a sudden, it's a fine pick here. Now, for me, the first slot that gets into A tier is going to be the 111 and 112. Here, you can get two guys in this tier, whether you like Nico, Puka, Neighbors, Genty, Brian Thomas. You should be able to wrap up two of these guys. If you want to put Achane, Derrick Henry in there as well, you can. And then the 3-4 turn, just like being on the turn feels nice too, where you can kind of scoop up some values. Maybe you get Hampton, again, Kenneth Walker, Trevion Henderson I'm looking for at this turn as well. You should be able to get one of the last of the elite quarterbacks and tight ends too. What did I write here? I said, yeah, pretty much that's what I said. Then at the 107 for me, this is just because I like McCaffrey so much, but we're going to put the 107 at A tier here because this is really only if you like McCaffrey as much as I do. I have McCaffrey as my 107 in a mini tier by himself, so I like the idea of getting McCaffrey at 107. Maybe sometimes you can get a faller, right? Maybe if you are in like a really running back heavy league and like Jacobs goes and JT goes and all of a sudden you can get a McCaffrey, Brian Thomas Jr. start. I would say probably not, but it kind of sets you up in a nice spot. You get McCaffrey, you can get maybe a faller here, you can get maybe a faller here on the way back, and just sort of scoop values at every turn. And for me, McCaffrey, I think, is a really strong player this year to start your draft with. Then we will put the 101. And it's not even that the 101 is a bad pick. I actually think the 101 is a great pick because you can get Chase, who to me is the best player on the board. You can come back and maybe you can get two of these guys from this tier, right? Whether that's Ladd, Chase Brown, Trey McBride, Bucky Irving, Brock Bowers. Like, you're going to probably end up with two of these guys. Somebody might pull up a Kyron, pull up a T. Higgins, pull up an elite quarterback, and all of a sudden you can just take the best two players available at the 2-3 turn. But the only reason that it's an A tier instead of S tier is just, I don't know, the 101's just been weird. Really, since I can remember over the last 5 years, the 101 has just kind of been cursed. We've seen last year McCaffrey was bad. Before that, we've seen stretches of like Justin Jefferson being a bad first overall pick. We've seen Jonathan Taylor. We've seen numerous times McCaffrey being a bad first overall pick. So I don't know. I like Chase. I like this slot, but that's like the only tiebreaker as to why it's not an S tier. And then for me, S tier, when we talk about draft slots to draft from in a 12-team league, I have the 102 through 106 here. You secure an elite player in round 1. Then in a perfect spot, you get to catch the round 2 fallers or the round 3 fallers at that round 2-3 turn. When in doubt, you can always take Hampton in round 3. It is a double-sided sword, though, when you talk about the middle of the third being bad, but the further back here, right? So if you get Lamb, you can maybe get a faller here, right? Maybe you can go Lamb and like Achane or Lamb and Derrick Henry or something, but you then lose out on maybe a Bucky coming back to you, or a Trey McBride coming back to you, or a Chase Brown or Ladd McConkey coming back to you. So that's kind of what I'm saying is like the further back, the better round 2 value you get, but the worse round 3 value you get. If you go from the 2 spot, you get a worse round 2 value, but you're almost guaranteed to get, if you can start Bijan, Chase Brown, and then Ladd comes back to you, to me, that's a dream start. All right, now that we have the player takes, the draft slot takes, let's just talk about overall strategy before we even get into the minute details of running back strategy and legendary running back upside. Let's just talk about some stuff that I feel like I haven't mentioned in other strategy videos I want to cover here. The first most important bit of advice I can give you is know your league. Know the settings. Know the format. Is it 2 wide receiver, 1 flex? Is it 3 wide receiver, 1 flex? Is it tight end premium? And I want to give you guys as much help as I can give you. So here, you can screenshot this. I think this is perfect. So I get this question all the time. How does this affect me if I'm in an 8 or 10 man league? What if I'm in a 14 team league? What if I'm in a 6-point passing touchdown super flex? I have it pretty much broken down here where shallower leagues, you want more emphasis on the starting lineup. 14 plus leagues, more emphasis on depth. 2 wide receiver, 1 flex or shallow lineups, you want more emphasis on the starting lineup and quarterback, tight end, and just all the way down, right? Super flex, obviously, pushing up the quarterbacks, tight end premium, push up the tight ends, PPR, push up wide receivers and pass catching running backs, all the way down. Think through every quirk in your league, 3rd round reversal, all of that. Think through all of it. Then on top of that, know your league mates. Know what tendencies your league has. And I get this question all the time. I'm streaming, and I have Jahmyr Gibbs as my 102. But on Underdog, I take CeeDee Lamb. It's a half PPR best ball site where the wide receivers get pushed way up. It's just kind of how the site is. And I know personally when I'm in those rooms that if I don't take CeeDee Lamb at the 102, I'm not going to be happy with my team. There's going to be running back values I can get later, and I would take CeeDee Lamb there. But if I was in a more casual home league with my buddies, I'm going to take Jahmyr Gibbs at 102, knowing the wide receiver values I'm going to get later. And you guys will see that throughout the summer. I will say, quick plug, we stream every single night, whether it's underdog drafts or high stakes drafts that you can come watch me draft in. And you'll see based on the site, I will alter my strategy. Where if I'm drafting on RT Sports, which is a very, how can I say this in the most respectful way? It's a very old school site where you're going to see running backs fly off the board, right? We got back end of the 2nd round. You go Chase Brown, Derrick Henry, Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, Kyron Williams, Breece Hall, Alvin Kamara, James Cook, running backs all off the board. And for me, what this tells me is we want to be breaking ties towards your league mates' tendencies. And what I mean by that is that in my rankings, I have A.J. Brown over Bucky Irving, but I come here in the 2nd round, I have them in the same tier, about a spot or 2 apart. So those are players that are very close in my rankings, and I want to just break ties towards the draft room, right? So this draft room is going to draft running backs at a high rate. So if I have 2 players ranked next to each other, I am going to break the tie to running back. And that's what I would tell you guys to do. If you're in a wide receiver hungry league, then break ties to wide receiver or quarterback, same thing, and just kind of know the tendencies of your league mates. And then from there, you can kind of not take advantage of the room, but just play it really well. Where I had done another draft before this where I noticed that quarterbacks went very late. So even though I have Jalen Hurts over RJ Harvey, I thought that there was a chance that Jalen Hurts or Jaden Daniels could come back to me. We take RJ Harvey, and then Jalen Hurts gets there in the 5th round, which seems nuts in a high-stakes $300 league, but I knew the environment I was drafting in. I think that that is one of the most slept-on things in fantasy football, is just knowing the people that are in the room drafting next to you. Now, on top of that, I also want to say you should know the site you're drafting on, right? The tool, which I'll link down below, where we look through high-stakes ADP and we compare it to Sleeper, Yahoo, and ESPN default rankings, and we can kind of leverage the rankings against them, is know the site you're drafting on. That tool will be down below in the comments section. Of course, all I ask is that you subscribe and leave a like. It helps a ton this time of the year, but you can kind of formulate your strategy based on the site you're drafting on. If you know you're drafting on Sleeper, you can go to the site, sort by Sleeper, and then all of a sudden you can kind of see, okay, here's the values, here's the players I like, where I think I can maybe get them, and you can form a strategy based off of that. And then the last thing I'll leave you with before we get into the, the nerdy stuff is don't force anything. I get questions all the time of, Ron, I'm thinking at the 105, I'm going to go Hero RB, Bijan Robinson, A.J. Brown, Josh Allen. How is that? And I cannot stress enough. don't be so rigid. Like, don't lock in a draft strategy. Don't lock in players. Like, don't fall in love with any players. Go in there, be water, be flexible, and just take the best values. Because if you are set on taking Bijan at the 105, what if, I don't know, in a crazy world, what if Jamar Chase gets to you at 105? What if in the mid-second, instead of A.J. Brown getting to you, Ashton Genty falls there, or Devon Achane falls there, and all of a sudden you have like this value on your hands, and it's a scenario that you didn't play out yet. So for me, I like to take the best players through 2 rounds, and then from there, I can kind of mold my strategy around that. Now, what I will say is, like earlier with the Bucky Irving, A.J. Brown example, is that if I have 2 players in the same tier, then you can kind of break ties towards either your league's tendencies or based on how you've done practice in the past, right? Maybe you prefer a round 1 wide receiver, round 2 running back, or a round 1 running back, round 2 wide receiver. And from there, you can kind of break ties that way. But for me, if I have a player fall to me that's a tier above the rest, I'm not going to stay rigid and stick to the plan I had before the draft. I'm going to take the best player on my board. Now, we've gone way more into depth on my overall strategy, but we're going to keep it short and give you guys the cliff notes of my numbers-based strategy for rounds 1 through 6 here. First, we're going to talk about running back strategy, and we want to make sure that we are understanding the risks of running back and prioritizing upside early. This is from the ideas of Pat Kerrane when he wrote, "Don't draft an early round RB without legendary upside in 2021," and it still holds true. The issue here is that when we look at bust rates, running backs bust at a higher rate than wide receivers in those first 2 rounds. And we also just are better at drafting wide receivers than running backs when we look at the correlation of points per game versus ADP from Ryan Heath's Anatomy of a League Winner article. And what that tells us is that if you're going to draft a running back in the first 2 rounds, we are better at drafting wide receivers. So the only way to offset that disadvantage is shooting for upside. You want to be shooting for this year's Saquon Barkley. But the good part is that we're good at identifying the next year's Saquon Barkley. We've never had the RB1 overall get drafted outside of the top 2 rounds over the last 5 years. So when you are drafting in those first 2 rounds and you are selecting a running back, you want the idea here to be that the guy you're drafting finishes RB1 overall to justify not just taking a wide receiver in that slot. Now, what I will say is when we get away from rounds 1 and 2 into rounds 4 through 6, which in years past, or rounds 3 through 6, in years past has been the RB dead zone. The RB dead zone is a thing of the past. Here, we can see running backs are getting drafted as late as ever. On ESPN's default rankings right now, the RB 13 is going at the 312 off the board, where in 2020, the RB 13, so the highest end RB 2, was going at the 202 back then. 13 of the first 14 picks on ESPN were running backs. Now, 13 of the first 36 picks are running backs, which is giving us an environment where running backs are efficiently priced and they are matching wide receivers through those first 60 or so picks when we compare projections versus ADP. So the dead zone is completely gone, and the only time to flip to wide receiver is when you're filling your flex from rounds 7, 8, 9, 10, but you can absolutely take running backs earlier in your draft, especially in the middle rounds. Like, I don't mind coming out of round 1 and 2 with a running back, and then rounds 3 through 6, another running back, and having 2 through 6. Now, when we talk about early wide receiver strategy here, we can see from Ryan Heath's 2025 Anatomy of a League Winner article. I promote it all offseason long. Check it out on Fantasy Points. To me, it's the best article of the summer. You can tell here from looking at league winner rates over the last 2 years from rounds 1 through 6, you can find running backs from rounds 1 through 6, but you can also find wide receivers. So we want to be making sure we're kind of having a balance of both. And we do know from this screenshot we just showed that we want wide receivers in our flex spot, right? After the first 60 or so picks and we're filling out our flex spots, that is when wide receiver now out projects running back. So we want to make sure by the time we get to round 7 plus that we already have wide receivers in our wide receiver spots so that we could be drafting the flexes, right? The goal is not to get to round 7 and then be drafting your wide receiver 1. It's to have your wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 already filled out so that you can get your flex deep and filled with wide receivers. But you can also see that you can get league winners. Round 1 wide receivers have kind of been a cheat code here. Same with round 2 wide receivers. But every year it's kind of its own thing. Things happen. There might be a league winner in round 4. We've seen Cooper Kupp get drafted in that range and be the wide receiver 1 overall. But we also know in terms of filling our flex with wide receivers that on these home league sites, when you use the tool that I will have in the comment section down below. It's called like Fantasy Nexus or whatever, but I don't really have a cool name for it yet. But you can see in terms of the best values on these home league sites, it is the wide receivers. You can get crazy wide receivers in round 7+. You can get Emeka Egbuka outside the first 6 rounds. You can get Ricky Pearsall, Matthew Golden, Jordan Addison, Stephon Diggs, Deebo Samuel. Not pictured here are other guys too that I think are fine picks like Josh Downs and Jaden Reed to fill through your flex. So that should be the goal, to get your stud running backs in those first 6 rounds, your stud wide receivers in those first 6 rounds, and then flip the switch in round 7+ to filling the flex with these wide receivers. And my overall guidelines for that is that through round 10, you want to have wide receivers through your flex plus 1 or 2. So if you have 2 wide receivers, 1 flex spot, that should be 4 to 5 wide receivers by round 10. 2 wide receivers, 2 flex, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 1 or 2. So that's 5 to 6 by round 10, and so on and so forth. And then we can cover the tight ends here just for a second. When we look at the league winner rates, we're going to talk about the quarterbacks and tight ends here. You can see quarterback around 3 and 4 has been a cheat code. That's why I think when round 3 gets super flat and there's not many players you like, that taking Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, all a really, really good option. Now, I will say in terms of tight ends, the numbers do not tell you to draft an early round tight end. They tell you to wait till round 5 and 6. I will say I don't like the round 5 and 6 options this year. For me, it's going to either be Bowers, McBride, Kittle, or punting it off until round 7+ of like Mark Andrews and Tyler Warren and whoever you like in that range. But I would buck against the data a little bit. Tight end has been tough. It is a small sample. I still like Bowers in the 2nd, McBride in the 3rd, and Kittle in the 3-4 turn. You are completely welcome to see the data and say, you know what, I am going to pass on all the elite tight ends this year, go for elite quarterbacks, and I would tell you that's probably a sound strategy. Now, when we wrap all of this up with a bow, here are your early round guidelines from this entire video here. Rounds 1 through 6, you want to end up with the best player available through rounds 1 and 2, and then build your team around that. Running backs drafted in round 1 and 2 should have an emphasis on league-winning upside. You should be aiming for 2 running backs through 6 rounds with a max of 3. You want 3 or more wide receivers through round 6, and then add flex depth round 7 through 10. For this video, we're talking about 2 wide receiver, 2 flex here. You can kind of alter that to your league, and why I do 2 wide receiver, 2 flex is I pulled you guys. And to me, 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, and 3 wide receiver, 1 flex are very similar, where you can start 4 receivers at a time. I draft in both of those leagues the same way. And then full PPR is also what you guys use most of the time. So based on what I said before, in terms of knowing your format, you can alter these to your 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league. Then we have draft an elite tight end or quarterback. You don't need either, though. You can just draft wide receiver and running back, and then get your quarterbacks and tight ends late, especially in a 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, where if you just have stud running back, stud wide receiver, stud flex spot, you can definitely play the waivers and play late round strategies at quarterback and tight end. And what I will say is I would not go for both, right? I do not want an elite tight end and an elite quarterback unless if it's a shallow league. So that's 8 to 10 teams or a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex setup. Now, with that being said, let's get into our 3 mock drafts. Now, here is our first mock draft over on Sleeper. It is a 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 2 flex, 5 bench, half PPR league from the 101. So an early draft slot here. Now, what I will say is that if you have a draft coming up, I use it in all of my own drafts. Make sure you check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart for my top 200 rankings cheat sheet. I have all my players ranked. I have my targets, my fades, my target rounds, tiers, all of that good stuff. So you can go into your drafts and make sure you dominate those leagues. You can find that patreon.com/Ron Stewart in the description or at the top of the comment section down below. Now here, of course, we take Chase 101. You guys know he is the undisputed 101 for me. We come back around to the 2-3 turn. And again, this is where we are hoping for some of those mid-round 2 guys to fall, right? Can a A.J. Brown, can a Bucky Irving, can a Josh Jacobs come back to us? We get Ladd McConkey and Chase Brown, guys who were both in that mid-2 range, right? Chase Brown, Ladd McConkey, the last 2 guys on the end there. That is, to me, a perfect 2-3 turn. Now, what I will say is that in a 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, I think it's completely viable to do this. But if you go Chase, Ladd, Chase Brown, you are likely locking yourself out of elite quarterback or tight end. So just be aware of that, right? So we pass on McBride, we pass on Kittle, we pass on Lamar. No quarterback or tight end comes back. I'm not taking Mahomes in the 5th round. I'm not taking Sam Laporta at 501 either. So now we just have to accept we are behind the 8 ball. at quarterback and tight end. And I will say, I've gotten the question all the time, can you take Chase Brown with Jamar Chase? I think you can. It's one of the best offenses in the league. It's the running game and the passing game. I don't think that one eats from the other. So for me, I think it's fine to kind of just be all in on a good offense. Then we come around to the 4-5. Again, you could maybe sell me on Mahomes or something. It's just not something I'm willing to do. So we just go best player available. We take Travion Henderson. We take Xavier Worthy, two guys that are absolute values in home leagues right now. We come back around to the 6th round. And I wanted to be realistic with some of these. So I know Igbuka can sometimes fall to like the 8, 9. I want this to be kind of a realistic version of what you may be able to do. So we go Igbuka, Rome Odunze. So now, I actually wanted to show this when we do these, is that you can see now we took best players available rounds 1 and 2. We drafted Chase Brown, Trevin Henderson. So now we have 2 running backs through the first 6 rounds. We have 3+ wide receivers through the first 6 rounds. We look good. Elite tight end or quarterback, you don't need either. So we have completed all of our guidelines here. Then the rest of this is just to kind of build out the rest of our team. We get Tyler Warren. You can see here how the team looks on paper. We get Tyler Warren in round 8. We get Charbonnet just to build out our running back room. JCM, who's going to be a huge value on all of these home league sites. Then we get Caleb Williams. Trevor Lawrence is our 2 quarterbacks. And then we stack Trevor Lawrence to Brenton Strange. So yes, we are weak at quarterback and tight end, but Chase Brown, Travion Henderson, Jamar Chase, Ladd McConkey, Xavier Worthy, Emeka Egbuka, Rome Odunze off the bench, Charbonnet off the bench, JCM off the bench. And then, Tyler Warren and Brenton Strange, I think, get the job done. Trevor Lawrence and Caleb Williams get the job done. And then you just have to kind of bet on yourself to find your way through waivers. Now, to switch it up, I wanted to show you guys a real draft that I did. You can see this is me, Ronald Stewart. We drafted this team on stream. This is a full PPR, 2 wide receiver, 2 flex league. We go Justin Jefferson. We come back around. We break the tie to Bucky Irving in terms of wide receiver versus running back. We come back. We get T. Higgins. Now, I will say, looking back, maybe this pick could have been Amari and Hampton, and then this round 4 pick instead of Harvey could have been Mike Evans or Xavier Worthy. But hindsight is 2020. I figured we would like a running back here. I still think Harvey in the 4th is fine, but the 2v2 option would have been like Hampton and Mike Evans versus RJ Harvey and T. Higgins. Looking back now, I probably prefer Hampton and Mike Evans, but I also think that this start is absolutely fine. We get 5th round Jalen Hurts. So through 6 rounds, when we look at the guidelines here, we have best players available through the first 2 rounds. We have 2 wide receivers we have 2 running backs through 6 rounds. We have an elite quarterback, and then we also have our 3+ wide receivers through round 6. So now we have wide receiver 2, flex 2, +1 by round 10, and then the rest of the team you can see it's a 20 round draft, so there's a lot more picks here, but here is the final team in terms of just like the starting lineup. You have Jalen Hurts, Bucky Irving, RJ Harvey, T. Higgins, Justin Jefferson, Dallas Goedert, Deebo Samuel, Rome Odunze, and I'm pretty happy with the team. We build out some running back depth with Scatabo, Tootin, Will Shipley, Ollie Gordon, DJ Giddens. We get Dallas Goedert, Ertz, and Harold Fannin as some tight end depth pieces there. We get Goddard to stack to Hurts. We get Jaden Reed falling in this draft, and for me, this is one of my favorite teams I've drafted on stream so far. Then we have one last team here. This is a 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 flex, 5 bench, full PPR league. I wanted to make sure that we had a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league in here from the back half of the first round. First, we know in a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex that we want to be pushing up the running back. So we take Ashton Genty here, knowing that at the 11 spot, we were going to get one of Nico, Neighbors, and Brian Thomas to come back to us. I feel great with a Genty to Brian Thomas start. I will say, I have had Genty as a fade. I have pushed him up since then because Devon Achan's injury now makes this running back scarcity a true issue at the 1-2 turn. He gets pushed up kind of by default, and then also in a league where it's 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, where you now push things towards a running back. I think Genty in a format like this is absolutely fine in the mid to late first. We get Brian Thomas. We come back around. At this point, this is a shallow league, right? 2 wide receiver, 1 flex. We want to put emphasis on an elite quarterback or an elite tight end. Everything's gone. Daniels, Hurts, Lamar, Allen, Bowers, McBride. This was our spot. So we take Kittle here, even though I like Hampton a little bit more. We had to take him here. I don't know why I can't show the entire draft board here, but now you guys can kind of see. Yeah. But we take Brian Thomas, Kittle. We come back around here. I like Kenneth Walker a ton, so now we have 2 running backs through round 6. We then take Tet McMillan, and Jalen Waddle. So we have 3+ wide receivers through round 6. From here, though, we have wide receivers through the flex, elite tight end, 2 running backs. We can kind of do whatever from here. I take what I believed was a falling Caleb Johnson. I will be straight up with you guys. Again, I want these to be realistic. So I did actually force this guy in the turn to take Ricky Pearsall and Egbuka here, just so they weren't available when my pick was on the board. We take Caleb Johnson. We come back around. We take Matthew Golden in the 8th round, who to me is a huge value. So now we have wide receivers through the flex, +1. We come back around. We take down. So that is now wide receivers through the flex, +1 and 2. We get JCM to build out our running back room. We then double up on quarterback with Fields. We stack Lawrence to Brian Thomas. And to me, this is just a really solid team in this setup where we have Fields at quarterback, Genty, Kenneth Walker, then Brian Thomas, Tet, George Kittle, Jalen Waddle, Caleb Johnson, and JCM to me are great depth pieces at running back, even though Genty and Kenneth Walker are studs in their own right. Then we also have Matthew Golden, Josh Downs off the bench in our receiver room. And to me, quarterback with Fields and Lawrence, we can play the matchups and be just fine. So that is going to do it for us in this one. This was my early round strategy. Again, I know you guys are cramming. I want to really put an emphasis on the first 6 rounds are absolutely huge. I feel like I laid that out as best as I could in terms of how I view the tier breaks, my favorite draft slots, my overall strategy, things to think through when you're on the clock. And to that I say, good luck in your drafts this weekend. Again, make sure, literally for $10, patreon.com/Ron Stewart, you can take all of this knowledge and then pair it with my own rankings, where I have my top 200 rankings, cheat sheet, they're tiered, my target rounds, my targets, my fades, all of that good stuff. It is literally the rankings I bring in with me when I do these drafts on stream and I draft in these high stakes leagues. You can have literally the exact set of rankings I'm looking at when I'm on the clock. I eat at my own restaurant and I welcome you to try a plate. I've kind of spinning there, but regardless, appreciate you guys watching. If you can't support there, I keep showing this screenshot and I hate doing it, but only 50% of you are subscribed. Please, please change that. Let's get to 70-30, 75-25. Subscribe. It's August. I'm putting out everything I can for you guys. Subscribe if you're new. Leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, I surround my body like I'm